Hey everyone, I've been playing a lot of Chaos Zero Nightmare recently. It's a new deck builder gacha game that has a roguelike mode as its main gameplay loop, and since roguelikes are my favorite type of games, I've been enjoying it quite a bit. The main aspect of the game consists in doing runs in a roguelike style to build up your characters, and then use that progression to complete other game modes. I think it's a great system, especially due to its seasonal content, but in its current state it also has a few issues. I wanted to make this video just to gather my thoughts and provide some feedback. After all, the game is still fairly new, so there is room for improvement, and I feel like it's better to voice concerns right away. The general gameplay is very similar to Slay the Spire and other deck builders, but it also has a stress mechanic similarly to Darkest Dungeon. I think the idea itself is fine, but in Chaos Zero Nightmare, the stress mechanic doesn't feel as interesting. You can reduce stress through heals and prevent some of it through blocking attacks with shields, but besides that, you don't have any meaningful or engaging way to interact with it. It's mostly just a bar that eventually will fill up, making your characters unresponsive until you use a certain amount of their cards, and you're mostly hoping that it doesn't happen during a bad fight. I wish characters had more unique interactions with the stress mechanic. For example, some damage dealers could deal more damage as they reach higher level of stress, but they could put fatigue or insanity cards in your deck as they do so. Some support characters instead could have reduced effects on their abilities, but generate calming cards that can reduce stress. These are just some random ideas that I just came up with, but you could find many other ways to make this mechanic more engaging. This could also make it more relevant outside of Chaos runs, since currently it doesn't have a purpose in other game modes. That said, the stress mechanic is not really a big issue, I just wish it was more interesting. One of the main issues of the game is its grinding aspect, required in order to get strong enough builds for the game modes outside of Chaos runs. However, I feel like the issue is not the grind itself, since chasing stronger and stronger builds for your characters is part of what makes this game interesting and a bit more unique in comparison to many other gachas. What makes it problematic are primarily two aspects. The first one is the lack of variance in both viable builds and the content offered by the game, while the second one is the fact that a run becomes immediately useless as soon as you miss one of the epiphanies that you were looking for. Overall, the game has a decent amount of content to offer enough variance during Chaos runs if you take into account all 5 planets and the seasonal one. However, in its current state, the game kind of forces you to focus on a very specific planet at a time, either because you need to grind the seasonal currencies or because you're looking for a very specific item, which is why the grind can feel very repetitive due to lack of variance. The lack of build diversity for most characters is partly due to the content itself, which pushes for builds that can deal high damage as quickly as possible, but it's also a consequence of the Chaos run itself, which is lacking unique interactions that could push for different kind of builds. For example, most events are all about gaining some credits or triggering the usual epiphanies, while most items are just minor stat boosts, with the occasional extra effect that has almost no impact in making different builds. Even the neutral epiphanies are fairly basic, and none of them is really helping with build diversity. In a regular deck builder, even bad cards can shine under the right conditions, but this is something that CZN is lacking at the moment. Neutral cards could be a great opportunity to push for different builds, but currently most of them are rarely worth taking because of the save data limit. Removing basic cards, triggering divine epiphanies and duplicating your own is usually better, so very few builds can afford to add the neutral cards, and even in those cases, they're not build defining, but they're simply making something that was already good a bit stronger. Monster cards requiring AD save data is one of the biggest offenders, since it made them borderline unplayable outside of Chaos. I honestly wouldn't mind removing the save data cap completely, and simply putting a cap on the amount of neutral cards, divine epiphanies and removes that you can have in total. It will be much easier to manage, especially for more casual players that just want to enjoy the game, and you wouldn't have to calculate every little step just to make sure that you're not going over and losing something important in the end, especially since you can stop epiphanies, which will be even more save data consumed by neutral cards. One of the biggest issues that I have with the current system is that what you need to do to facilitate your Chaos run is completely different than what you need to do if you're trying to build a good save data. If you want to prioritize winning your run, you normally want to remove basic cards and add good neutral cards, since they will increase the quality of your draws every turn. However, if you're trying to build a good save, you want to focus only on one character at a time, removing unique cards from the other characters to reduce the odds of stealing divine epiphanies from events and duplicates from the bosses. You want to avoid neutral cards for the exact same reason, especially before the first boss, and maybe you can add some of them in the interior if you think you will have some spare save data. Doing all this will make the run harder, but that's also why it's way better to farm save data in lower difficulties. And with that I mean difficulty 8 for Lab 0 and newly generated Chaos runs in the Codex at difficulty 9 or 10. Lab 0 difficulty 11 is extremely hard in comparison, and just winning a run can be quite challenging, especially if you keep bad modifiers, but outside of the first time clear for some rewards or for personal challenge, you don't really have an incentive to play at this difficulty. The save data cap is based on the modifiers that you roll, and you can go up to tier 14+1 if you play in trauma mode. These modifiers can already roll on lower difficulties, with enemies that are about level 80, which makes runs considerably easier when compared to level 130 enemies that you will get at the highest difficulty. One advantage of Lab 0 is that you don't have to waste currency to generate a new map, and you can almost freely reroll its modifiers until you get a higher tier without annoying modifiers. However, that's not the case in the Zero system. Generating a new run is fairly expensive, since on average it requires more currencies than what you will get if you complete an entire run, but that's not even the main issue. First of all, you can't even choose what planet you'll get, so it will be 3 random ones, and the same planet can appear multiple times. But the main problem is that you can simply leave and restart your run as soon as you fail to get the right epiphany for your build. In order to guarantee a new map of the same planet, you need to finish the entire run, which feels like a massive waste of time if the build that you were attempting to make was already a failure. However, there is also another issue. If you finish the map, you'll get a new one that will have a slightly higher level enemies, basically increasing the difficulty with no tangible benefit. All this can ruin the enjoyment of the Chaos runs, but I still think that the core idea of the game is very good, and it just needs various adjustments and improvements. At the moment, the core issues are that Chaos runs don't have enough variance, but at the same time, they have too much variance in order to build a good save in a reasonable amount of time. The two things are directly at odds, because if you add more variance to the Chaos runs to make them more interesting and engaging, it will become even harder to make specific builds. However, if you facilitate making specific builds during the Chaos runs, either by giving more access to specific epiphanies, removes, and dupes, then the Chaos run itself will become even more boring, since you will be able to push for the exact same builds every time. I think the main objectives should be 1. Increase the variance of Chaos runs to keep them engaging. 2. Provide a worthwhile reason to complete the Chaos run even if you don't get the build that you were looking for. 3. Give players a worthwhile reason to play on harder difficulties. 4. Facilitate making specific builds for the content outside of Chaos. This could be achieved in different ways, but it might require a system that allows you to interact with your save data outside of the Chaos runs. My favorite idea at the moment involves a currency system. The way Chaos runs are generated in this game is fairly similar to Path of Exile map system. In Path of Exile, most of your endgame revolves around killing enemies and looting their items, but you're not really expecting to drop a direct upgrade to your current gear. However, the reason why that kind of grind feels rewarding is the fact that you can still drop currencies, which you can trade or use to upgrade or craft new equipment. Even if they're completely different games, I feel like such a system could work in CZN. They could introduce currencies that can interact with your save data, allowing you to make some changes. For example, you can have an Orb of Epiphany, which will trigger or reroll the epiphany of the selected card, giving you the usual pop-up with 3 random options just like it will happen during a run. There could be an Orb of Removal to remove a card from the deck, an Orb of Replication to make a dupe, and so on. Even currencies that can change your items, like a box of random legendary or mythic equipment for each slot. This way, you could even grind the planets that you prefer while still having access to loot that might be tied to other planets, even if it might be less efficient to do so, or get a combination of items that are currently impossible. The changes will still be limited by the save data, for example, preventing you from triggering a Divine Epiphany if you go over the cap, but maybe you could even increase the current cap through other currencies. This system could be implemented even through a shop that uses a general currency that you can obtain during the Chaos run, so that you can buy the type of interaction that you want, but it will be far less exciting than just dropping the currencies during the run itself. The main purpose of this system will be to facilitate building decent saves for more casual players, since grinding Chaos runs can be a big time investment, but also promote more min-maxing in deck building for people that can afford to put more time into it. After all, the currencies themselves will be tied to the season, so you can't really hoard them forever, and they will give you more opportunity to experiment with different builds and characters. That said, I don't know how common this kind of currencies should be, but still a dupe currency should probably be fairly rare. An important factor of such a system is to give you a reason to complete your Chaos run even if something goes wrong, just because you can always find something useful to fix your builds later on. The final boss itself could have guaranteed rewards, and in general, it could be an opportunity to give more rewards if you play on harder difficulties. Just to give players the choice between some quick runs or something more challenging without feeling that they are missing out on rewards. You could consider this currency system like a pity system that guarantees you something as long as you keep playing, instead of being an all or nothing when you attempt to build a good save. Also, since this game is fairly time-consuming in comparison to many other gachas, they could give some of these currencies as a reward for stuff like weeklies or first-time clears for some seasonal event, just to facilitate building at least a few characters for people that can't afford to put much time into the game. This one might be a bit more subjective, but I think that the current game modes are also a bit of an issue. Basin is the classic endgame mode that you basically find in every gacha at this point, where you need to kill enemies in a certain amount of time in order to get the full rewards. I don't like it in any of them, but it feels even worse in this game, since it pushes you into making quick, high damage builds, and as a result, slower, more defensive builds don't really have a purpose. It would be fine if there were other game modes that promoted different builds, but that's not really the case at the moment. The new Grey Rift event was supposed to do that, but we have all seen the results. This is usually the case whenever we have game modes that are score-based, since at the end of the day, some builds will always be better than others for a specific encounter, and that tends to destroy variety if you want to compete for higher ranks. The positive effect is that this game mode pushes you into making a very specific build just for the event, which will be a cool thing if it wasn't for two major issues. First of all, everyone will do exactly the same since you can see their builds in the leaderboard. And second, it would be cool if building very specific builds wasn't just awful in the game's current state. Having to grind a very specific planet while looking for extremely rare items and getting the right epiphanies and dupes is very RNG and time consuming. This gatekeeps anyone that can't afford to put too much time into the game from ever competing in these game modes. It's fine if a game rewards you for playing the game more, but I don't think this is a good way to do it, or at least there should be systems in place to mitigate these issues. In general, my main issue with the current endgame is that it's not particularly engaging. And with that, I mean that you're not really interacting with your enemies in a meaningful way. They're just there to be killed as quickly as possible due to turn limits or just massive punching bags to generate more score. I think the 3 seasonal bosses are a better form of endgame, but they're still promoting high damage builds, which makes them very short encounters that you have to do only once anyway. I feel like the game really needs a better game mode outside of chaos runs that utilizes the save data that you collected. At the moment, you spend most of your time building save data in the chaos runs, but after that, there isn't much to do with it. We need another, repeatable game mode that utilizes save data, something that can at least give you some seasonal currency and then you'll introduce once for the new shop. Something that can be played as an alternative to chaos runs when we are satisfied with our builds. One example could be a boss rush mode, where you need to kill multiple bosses one after the other, since this can promote having more defenses in order to handle multiple encounters, and also builds that can deal with different boss mechanics. Otherwise, as many others suggested, harder chaos runs that utilize your save data. In this case, the run itself shouldn't allow you to make more changes to your save data like a regular run, but there could be some unique reward at the end, like an extra dupe or a small increase in the total save data. With the currency system that I previously mentioned, this type of runs could be an opportunity to give even more currencies, but in this case, it will need some restrictions to avoid becoming the best thing to run instead of regular chaos. The most boring way will be to limit the amount of runs that you can do each week. Otherwise, similarly to Path of Exile, this type of run could be a rare map drop that you can find while doing regular chaos runs. Better endgame modes can also make the stress mechanic more relevant outside of the regular chaos runs, giving them the opportunity to develop it in a more interesting way. I know that many of these changes are meant to push CZN into a more regular game instead of a gacha, but since the core loop of the game involves grinding a roguelike mode, I feel like some of the system will be an overall improvement. At least, that's what I would like. I'd rather have a more solid gameplay loop than a half-baked version that's trying to juggle the usual endgame modes copy-pasted by every other gachas. I will also remove all the daily and weekly rewards, putting them as seasonal rewards that can be obtained at any point of the season to reduce FOMO and allow players to play at their own pace, similarly to other seasonal games, but we all know that that's never going to happen. Yet another issue is how expensive it is to fully build characters in this game. First of all, you need so many different materials from different farming stages, but the problem is the overall amount of stamina required. This is a common issue for most gachas, especially early on, but in CZN it feels a lot worse. The fact that the recent patch reduced the amount of units required to level up characters by 80% is a clear indication that something is wrong, and especially maxing out characters' potential nodes is even worse. And sure, it's not really a requirement to fully max a character, since you can complete all the content without that level of investment, but it's still an unnecessary limitation, especially considering that in CZN you also have to grind for the save data, which makes some of the systems completely unnecessary. Memory fragments sharing the same farming stage with another set that you might not even want is another unnecessary annoyance. I can understand slowing down the progress, but there are way too many layers, and together they can make the progression fairly slow and annoying. When a new character comes out, you just want to play it right away, not wait days or even weeks before you can fully test them out, especially when you want to compare them to other characters that you might have already maxed. This might become even worse if they keep adding new memory fragments designed around the new characters, since it prevents you from preparing a suitable set beforehand. It might be a personal issue of mine, but one of the things that I dread the most whenever a new character releases is having to farm and grind new sets for them before they are in a somewhat playable state. As unreasonable as it might be, I stopped playing other gachas because of these very reasons, since it made me more annoyed than excited about new characters' release. I feel like it's one of the worst gear systems, but for some reason, it's also copy-pasted in many gachas nowadays, which is also what makes it more annoying, since you have to deal with it in multiple games. At least, in other games, it's all there is, but I feel like CZN doesn't even need such a system, since you could integrate most of the stats in your save data, contributing to a more diverse approach to your builds based on what you encounter in your chaos run. Anyway, that's all I have for now. I probably forgot some other aspects of the game that will need some adjustment, but these are the most important ones that I could come up with at the moment. I really like this game, and I think it has the potential to become way better with the right improvements. We're also getting a livestream with a roadmap for the game in the next few days, so we'll see if they're already addressing some of these issues. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, in case you have other problems or suggestions. We might get a survey asking for our feedback by the end of the season, so I think it's a good opportunity to share ideas beforehand. After all, the game is still new, so there is still room for improvement. That said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.